First, I'm going to give you a little quick history lesson, not unlike what the Rav just gave you, because I want to put into context what I want to talk about and why it's significant. In Canada, in America, there's a store called Dollarama. Do you have a dollar store here? Yeah. Where everything is $1 or under $2, yeah? Okay, so 3 days before I left to come here, I went into the dollar store near where I live. And the area that I live in is not a particularly Jewish neighborhood. So I'm walking in the Dollarama and there's a whole row of blue and silver wreaths for the door. A whole row of decorations that look like Jewish Christmas. And it's really very simple, that's what they look like. And what I'm here to talk about today is how Hanukkah is not Jewish Christmas, chas v'shalom. Not only is it not, it is an oxymoron. It is the antithesis for some of the reasons the Rav discussed. You see, in the time of the Greeks, when Alexander the Great ruled the world, like the rabbi said, he had no problem with us. As long as we paid our taxes and did our thing, everything was okay. But later, when Antiochus became the head of the Greek army, he saw that there was something very, very threatening about our belief in spirituality. Why? Well, first you have to understand what the worldview was. When I was a teenager, and I would go to Europe in the summers, I would bring Levi's jeans because you could sell them on the black market for, if they cost $20 in Canada, you could sell them for 100 US. I remember when in Moscow they opened the first McDonald's and the golden arches were there, a symbol of America, the strong, taking over the world. And in the last 50 years, I think we could say that Western culture, North American culture, and everything it stands for, well, that was the predominant culture, just like Hellenism. Hellenism believed the following. Number one, that there is nothing beyond the human being. There's the body, and that's it, that's everything, and it's enough. They believed in the disciplines that we today benefit from. There is no question that the Greeks gave the world the seat of democracy, architecture, design, athletics, music, philosophy. Great things came from the Greeks. But what they believed is that those things, they were an entity unto themselves. The Jewish belief is that whatever you do, you host a TV show, you're a rebbetzin, you work with children with special needs, you stay home and you care for your family, whatever it is you do, that the absolute power is in connecting that to something bigger. Because if you are just the thing that you do, then your identity is tied to something false. I made 400 TV shows for the show that I was on. And I remember the day that that program was canceled, that I got a phone call from the network. It should never happen to you. After 400 episodes, they phoned me and said, you know, the show is very expensive to produce. We have enough that we can sell it into syndication. And as much as we like you and respect you, can you hear me? Yes. As much as we like you and respect you, we have to cancel the program. And I remember hanging up the phone and saying to myself, oh my God, who am I now? As though everything that I was attached to what I did. I would go to the shopping centers over the years after I stopped working in television, and people would say to me, oh, didn't you used to be Adrienne Gold? Now I'm Janet Smith. Yes. Greek culture was such that the highest form of the human being was his body. This is why that the Olympics, the original Olympics, they were held in the nude. This is why in the gymnasiums that opened all over the continent, that working on your body became the primary thing because there was no soul. So I'm just going to ask you a quick question. I believe we have some prizes. Are we a body that has a soul, or are we a soul that has a body? What do you think? Put your hand up.
Soul that has a
What do you
body.
think? Okay, you think you're a soul that has a body. Okay, so that's true. That is what Judaism believes. But the Greeks believed that you are a body and there is no soul. There is nothing to attach you and your physicality to anything else. You know how you can tell? Do you remember studying Greek mythology in high school? Do you remember the gods? The gods were half human and half God, or they were half animal and half God. What was the purpose of that? Well, the purpose of that is very simple. If the God is just like you, then you can do whatever you want. There's no standard. Let me give you another example. It's a story. Once, there was a town. This village had been there for hundreds of years. In the center of town, there was a building, and on the top of the building, there was a clock tower. When people would go about their business during the day, they would look at their watch, and they would look at the clock. And if they saw that the clock's time was different from their time, they would quickly adjust their watches, because let's face it, the clock was the accurate one. After some years, a bunch of people became very frustrated. They said this: why does the clock have to be up so high? We hurt our necks literally looking up at it. Why can't we bring it down to eye level so everyone can see it? And after much fighting and complaining and arguing, finally, after 100 years, they took the clock from the tower and they brought it down to eye level. So what do you think happened? I'll tell you what happened. People would walk by and they'd look at their watch and they'd look at the clock. And they'd say, oh, well, I must have the right time. And they would adjust the clock. And so many people did this over so much time that eventually they broke the clock. The clock was impossible to fix, and they threw it in the trash. The Greeks said, not only is that too high, but we'll bring it to eye level. Our gods will be like that clock. They will be like us. They'll be flawed, imperfect. Because if something that you're supposed to aspire to is too difficult, if it's too hard to look up, if it asks too much of you, then life gives you two choices. You either say, I'm doing the best I can, sorry, or you throw it away. In Greek culture, the first thing they outlawed was circumcision. Why? Because if you did exercise in the nude, and the Olympics were done in the nude, you wanted to look like the great Olympiads. Jewish men would have surgeries to restore their foreskins. They would hang weights at the bottom to pull the skin back over their glands so that they looked like the Greek men. Men named Yoshua changed their name to Jason, like Jason and the Golden Fleece, Jason and the Argonauts. There were so many of us, and it wasn't just a few Jews, it was most of us. We very happily went, we'll be just like them. Hanukkah, and the story of Hanukkah happens to commemorate a battle. A very small group of yeshiva-like boys. I want you to imagine the black pants, the white shirt, a little stain under the arm, it's like dandruff on the sweater, like that, like the small little Jewish boys. I want you to imagine that they all leave, what's that area called? Let me, just a second, in here in Mexico City, I know, don't tell me. Polansky? Yeah, something like that. All of those dudes, imagine them, they decide to take on the U.S. Army. I don't think so. But a small band of Jews did. And they went into the fields and they did like a guerrilla warfare. And they fought. And what should have been impossible happened to become a battle, and they won. That was the primary miracle. We learned something very powerful from that. And this is a deep Jewish truth. Even when things seem impossible, you do it anyway, if it's the right thing to do. Our Mishnah teaches us, it is not upon you to complete a task, but you are not free to not start it. This is true of your marriages, of your children, and it's true of whatever is truth. Even if it looks impossible, if it is right, you do it and God helps you. So then, the Hellenists and the Greek regime had brought pigs into our temple, idols everywhere. Finally, by the time we got back into the temple to rededicate it, we found only enough oil for one day, and it burned for 8. So here's 2 statements for you. Why do we celebrate the miracle of the oil and not the war? Well, there's 2 reasons. Number 1, Jewish people, when we are forced to, we defend with a sword, but we fight with light. Number 2, the Hanukkah is lit with olive oil. Why are Jews like olive oil? You ever make a salad dressing? You shake, 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 and what happens after 2 minutes? It rises right back to the top. It separates. We are different. Not better, not worse, different. We are meant to be an or lagoyim, a light to the nations. Our light that we're supposed to put in the window of our house is to remind ourselves and the world we have a job. So I want you to look at this. What is this candle called? This is the shamash. Why is that significant? Is the shamash, does it count as one of the 8 candles? No. But you notice that it's slightly elevated, a little higher. We, Jewish women, are shamashim. Why? Our job is to take our light and to light other wicks, our children. You take the light, you hold it to the wick just until the candle burns on its own. And then you do the next one, and the next one, all the way through, and after every time you light it, it goes back in its place, separate, slightly elevated, but separate. One of the biggest mistakes that Jewish mothers make is that we don't know how to be the shamash. We want to be one of the candles. Either we hold our flame so close to the candle, our child, that the child is dying of our heat, like a helicopter circling around, doing their work, protecting them every minute, not letting them grow. Or we don't hold the light long enough, so it will burn on its own. That's why, after you light or educate, and the word Hanukkah has at its root the word chinuch, which is education. Dedication and education. What is it that we are dedicating? You are dedicating Jewish values into your children and into the world. And it can't be Jewish Christmas. It can't be just because, Adam Sandler wrote a song, 8 crazy gifts and 8 crazy nights. It's not about that. It's not about the presents. You know why you spin the dreidel? Because they forbade us to study Torah. So the boys would gather on the corners and they would pretend to be playing a game of tops with Hanukkah geld, with money. So if the soldiers came and said to them, "What are you doing?" They'd say, we're gambling. This is why we use the dreidel. This is why we have the geld. We celebrate the light. That's our job. As a Jewish mother, when your children are very, very small, you are like the director in a play. Your job is to pick them up, move them, put them to bed. Your primary goal when you have small children is for them to go to sleep. And when they're older, it's for them to wake up. And you have that job. But by the time they become teenagers, your job is to become the supervisor, the shamash. What does a bad supervisor do? A bad supervisor micromanages, is in your child's face every minute, asking too many questions. Where are you going? What did you do? Who were you with? Who was there? Did you smoke? Did you drink? Did you eat? What did you have? Did you do this? Did you do that? Who played with you in school today? Do you have any friends? Did anyone ask you out? Did somebody say they liked your dress? Bad supervisor. Just like if you were at work, someone tried to do your work for you. Somebody tried to tell you every time you were wrong. They wouldn't let you work on your own. Bad supervisor micromanages and takes the flame and burns the person they're supposed to do the chinuch. But a Jewish mother, a shamash, you stand slightly separate and you wait until one of the flames maybe sputters out, and then you go back and relight it if necessary. Otherwise, stay back. When your children become adults, then you're a consultant. You don't speak until they ask you. But at this phase in your life, being a shamash is your job. How do we light up the world? So I want you to know 2 stories. First of all, we never compromise what we know is truth for the sake of the culture around us. In the Janowska Road camp during the middle of the war, Rabbi Israel Spira, a great rabbi, the Bluzhover Rebbe, was one day cutting wood with another Jew in the camps, sawing wood. He was very tall, and the man who he was sawing with was very short. The Nazis like to do things to make us look humiliated. So one had to bend over, and the other one had to stand up. It made the job harder. The men were starving. They were dying. And suddenly they heard a screaming, the likes of which they had never heard before. And many, many people running. And they saw a wagon. It was called the Children's Action. This was when they were taking the precious, beautiful Jewish angels, the little children, to the ovens. And the screaming and the crying from the mothers and the fathers that ran alongside them could open up the heavens and destroy it. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a woman who looked feverish and crazy stops beside the rabbi and says, "Give me a knife." And the rabbi turns to her and he says, "My dear, you will get to the world of truth soon enough. We Jews, we're not supposed to hasten that. You can't take your own life." And the Nazi came over because they weren't allowed to talk. And he said to her, "What are you talking about? What did she say to you?" And Rabbi Spira said, "She asked me for a knife." You see, I explained to her that we Jews are not allowed to take our own life, even when things are terrible. We must continue to trust and to work hard. But by this time, the woman had seen the outline of a knife in the Nazi officer's uniform. And with a confidence beyond belief, she turned to him and she said, "Give me your knife." And maybe he was shocked. Maybe he was shocked because prisoners didn't speak like that. He reached into his pocket and handed her the knife. Surely he wanted to be amused at her taking her own life. She leaned over onto the ground and she picked up a dirty bundle of rags and she started to unwrap it. Inside the rags, on a pure snow-white pillow, was a newborn baby. She leaned over the baby. She said the words of the bracha for Brit Milah. She circumcised her son. She turned to the Nazi and she said, "Hashem, Rabbana Shalom gave me a perfect, healthy boy. I return to you a kosher, healthy Jew." And she handed the baby to the Nazi officer. This is light. Around the same time, there was a boxcar that was traveling along its route to Auschwitz. The Nazis used to like to play little games. They would put the boxcar at the side at the night, and sometimes they'd leave it there for days on end. No food, no drink. And one particular night, a man by the name of Mendel, who was a boy at the time, who lives in Crown Heights, New York, still to this day, was just a young boy. And he was in that boxcar with an old man from the town he came from that he knew from his father, a very old man. The Nazis pulled the boxcar to the side of the tracks, and they left it there in the middle of the winter. It was dark, and Mendel looked at this old man, and maybe in his eyes he saw his grandfather, because his family had all been killed. And he decided that he would keep that man alive. So all night he stroked him and rubbed him and massaged him and played with his feet and kept his hands warm and blew on him and touched him and held him and held him. And the next morning, when the light finally came back into the thin slats of the boxcar, everyone in the car was dead, except Mendel and the old man. Mendel, because he had moved all night, and the old man, because someone else had used their heat to keep him alive. This is Judaism 101. You use your light to light someone else. A candle can light hundreds and hundreds of other lamps without ever taking anything away from itself. To be a light is to be a Jew, is to know that your purpose for being here is not your career. It's not to be the politician or the athlete or the mathematician or the philosopher or any of those things. Those things are all very nice, and the Greeks understood that, but they mean nothing if you're not using those things to bring light into the world. If you have small children, there's a way to teach them what this means. If you take a match and you light it in front of your house in the middle of the day, it seems to make no difference. But if you go into the bathroom and you shut the door and turn out the lights and you light that match, you'll see that it illuminates everything. The smallest amount of light makes a difference. And it's not in the big places. It's in the small, day-to-day. The way you speak to your maid, the way you deal with the driver, the way you talk to the clerk in the store, the way you talk to the woman who you really don't have so much in common with, but still, you give her your light. There was a man who had a very big business, and he was trying to decide who he would give the business to of his 3 sons. He wasn't sure. So he gave them a project. He told all 3 of them, the barn out back, fill it to capacity. There were 3 barns. The first son decided that the best way to fill it would be newspaper. He would stack it all the way through, and that would make it full. And that's what he did. Thousands and thousands and thousands of newspapers. He brought his father in. His father looked inside and said, "Son, this is excellent. This is pretty close to full. You did amazing." The next son drilled a hole in the roof of the barn, brought a machine, and dropped sand into the hole of the roof until the whole barn was filled with sand. When the father came to see, he said, "This is remarkable. This is full." And then the third son said, "One moment, Father, I'm going to do mine now." And he went to the barn, and he took a small candle, and he lit it in the center of the room, and he said, "Father, now this room is filled with light." The business was left for him. Creativity, wisdom, the knowledge that your job is to stand slightly separate when you're not needed, but to light those who are around you. This is how we're going to fill the world. And it is in the merit of women that this will happen. Our Torah teaches us that it was in the merit of women that we got out of Egypt, and that at the end of days it will be the righteous women who hasten the redemption. Our strength, female strength, is internal. What we have to offer any situation, what we have to give, is bina, wisdom. That wisdom can sometimes choke out other people. While you are busy being a light, you must be very careful not to set the other person on fire. Not your child, not your friend, not your spouse. No one. The Greeks took the clock tower and they brought it down until it broke. They developed disciplines that were beautiful, but refused to attach them to greatness. The Jews have always been about the marriage of the soul and the body. I will finish by telling you one more story that illustrates this best of all. Once again, in a concentration camp, in a bunk, there was a man named Elijah. Elijah was old and broken, like all of the men were, skin and bones, starving. But Elijah had dignity. Every night, after the meager dinner of dirty water that was supposed to be coffee and bread that was mostly sawdust, the men would go back to their rooms, to their bunks, and the Nazi officers would come in with the big margarine tub. And the men would throw themselves at it, licking the oil that was stuck to the sides of it. And the Nazi officers would laugh. Those beasts would laugh. Look at them. Ugh, disgusting. We were starving. They all did it except for Elijah. He refused to. Until one very cold winter night, when the Nazis came in with the margarine tub, Elijah got up and threw himself like a crazed beast into that tub. And he rolled around in it like a madman. And the Nazi officers laughed. The last Jew has been broken. We finally broke him. Look at him. No more dignity now. Look at him. Look at him rolling around like an animal. And when he finally got out of it, they laughed and took the container with them, the tub. And Elijah sat on the floor, and he was rocking back and forth. And he was pulling out the loose threads from his pajamas. Just pulling them. And the men went, my God. Elijah always had dignity. He never lowered himself. He wouldn't jump in that tub and he wouldn't eat like we did because he cared too much about his dignity. And now he's gone too. Then Elijah took his one last possession, which was a potato, and he started to pull holes in it, poke holes in it. And then he took the threads and twisted them into wicks because they were covered in grease and oil. He put the wicks in the holes of the potatoes. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his matches. He turned and he said to the men, gentlemen, tonight is the night for the first lights of Hanukkah. That's a Jew. We do not humiliate ourselves for the body alone. But when we can attach the physical to the spiritual, sure, go ahead and laugh. We'll roll around in that tub. This isn't to feed my belly. This is to feed my neshama. This is the Jewish way. And this is the meaning of Hanukkah. Do not separate the body from the soul. No matter what the culture tells you, no matter what your work life is, there is more importance in the world than the physical. It's hard to find the time, but there are classes, there are teachers, there are books, there are trips, there are things online. Women, be a shamash. Be the light that you want to see in the world. And never separate who you are in your body from who you could be if your body and soul work together. Happy, happy, happy Hanukkah.